Okay, any reason why we shouldn't get this underway? Go for it. I'm getting the signal. Okay, the live stream is beginning. Good morning and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. My name is Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the senior minister here at Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis and moderator of today's forum with director of the Digital Democracies Institute, Dr. Wendy Chun. We're pleased to have an opening musical performance for you today, both in-house here and live stream. Jennifer Grimm and Joe Cruz have each been in the music business for decades. Jennifer's sweet, sultry, powerful voice, Jennifer, did you write that? You did, okay. Has been called one of the best in Minnesota. I think that's from a critic, not from Jennifer. And Joe brings passionate Latin-infused guitar to the mix, and these two are an unstoppable musical force, and we're really delighted to have you here. Welcome. Join me in welcoming to the Westminster Town Hall Forum Jennifer Grimm and Joe Cruz.
Yes, we are an amazing duo. You can just ask us, and we'll let you know. It's very clear our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. The radio and the telephone and the movies that we know, they're all just passing fancies that in time may go. But oh my dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. And time the Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay. But our love is here to stay. Well, thank you very much. We are called Grimm and Cruz, Jennifer Grimm and Joe Cruz, and we do each have our own careers, and we also have this duo together, which has been very, very fun over the last few years. And I think it's a good idea that you play one of your original beautiful songs off of your solo record. You can find Joe Cruz, C-R-U-Z Cruz, with a beautiful song called Arizona Moon. Joe Cruz. Joe Cruz. And so when Joe and I play together, sometimes we do some jazz, sometimes we do some R&B, sometimes reggae, sometimes country. So we never quite know what we're gonna do. And so I think maybe right now, what if we do an R&B song? Joe and I happen to be married to each other, even. And we have 4 children, and they are ages 23, 15, 12, and 3. That is the proper reaction. Oh. All of those. Those are perfectly valid. Yes, we had 3 girls, and then we finally, 3 years ago, had a little boy. He looks just like Joe, only with a smaller guitar. Otherwise, it's about the same. So we're gonna do a song about ooh, baby. Ooh, la 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 la. Ooh, la 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 la. I did you wrong. My heart went out to play, but in the game I lost you. What a price to pay. I'm crying. If you know it, sing it. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Mistakes, I know I've made a few, but I'm only human. You've made mistakes too. I'm crying. Sing it. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Well, I'm just about at the end of my rope, but I can't stop trying. I can't give up hope, 'cause I feel someday I'll hold you near, whisper I still love you until that day is here. Well, I'm crying. Sell it. Ooh, baby, baby. Yes. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Oh, 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 yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Ooh, baby, baby. Baby, baby, hey, ooh. Thank you so much. How about that Joe Cruz? Oh my goodness. You like the whole band. I'm just over here tipping and tapping. I'm not doing much of anything. Hey, I don't know if you heard that, a little bit of that flamenco-infused, sort of spicy little nugget over here. I was thinking maybe we could do something that's a little Joe Cruz. Not Joe Cruz like Tom Cruise. Like I said before, Joe Cruz, C-R-U-Z. It's a special type of cruise. What do you think about doing something in Espanol? You can play guitar in Spanish, and then I'll sing in Spanish. Tanto tiempo disfrutamos de este amor, nuestras almas se acercaron tanto sí, que yo guardo tu sabor, pero tú llevas también sabor a mí. Si negaras mi presencia en tu vivir, bastaría con abrazarte y conversar. Tanta vida yo te di que por fuerza tienes ya sabor a mí. No pretendo ser tu dueña, no soy nada, yo no tengo vanidad. De mi vida doy lo bueno, soy tan pobre que otra cosa puedo dar. Pasarán más de 1000 años, muchos más, y yo no sé si tenga amor la eternidad, pero vaya tal como aquí, en la boca llevarás sabor a mí. Pretendo ser tu dueña, no soy nada, yo no tengo vanidad. De mi vida doy lo bueno, soy tan pobre que otra cosa puedo dar. Pasarán más de 1000 años, muchos más, y yo no sé si tenga amor la eternidad, pero vaya tal como aquí, en la boca llevarás sabor a mí, sabor a mí. Gracias, gracias. Thank you so much. And if you've never seen us or heard us or anything before, and you want to find out where we're playing around town and when we might just be joining you again here at the Forum, please go to the website, jennifergrimm.com. Grimm is how you spell it, jennifergrimm.com, and that'll list all of the places that we are playing together and all of the projects that I'm doing. Also, joecruzmusic.com will let you know the same information about us, but also all of the projects that he's involved in. If you happen to go to jennifergrimm.com, you can put your email in that front page, and then I'll send you out a periodical little note saying, we're over here and we're over there, and I'll let you know about it. This sounds like he is starting a Patsy Cline song, and so I will follow suit. I go on walking after midnight out in the moonlight, just like we used to do. I'm always walking after midnight, searching for you. I walk for miles along the highway. Well, that's just my way of saying I love you. I'm always walking after midnight, searching for you. I stop to see a weeping willow crying on his pillow. Maybe he's crying for me. And as the skies turn gloomy, the night winds whisper to me, I'm lonesome as I can be. I am always walking after midnight out in the starlight, just hoping you may be somewhere walking after midnight, searching for me. I'll take it, baby. Stop to see a weeping willow crying on his pillow. Maybe he's crying for me. And as the skies turn gloomy, the night winds whisper to me, I'm lonesome as I can be. Oh, I'm always walking after midnight out in the starlight, just hoping you may be somewhere walking after midnight, searching for me. Well, thank you very much. We do hope that you stay in touch. We do have a country Christmas show coming up at the very end of November at the Zephyr in Stillwater. And another couple cool things happening tomorrow. I head up to the Judy Garland Museum because I have this new Judy Garland show called Jennifer Grimm Sings Judy Garland, 12-piece band, 7 horns. And the Judy Garland Museum came and saw the show, and they have now hired me and Joe and the whole band to come and play for Judy Garland's 100th birthday celebration at the Judy Garland Museum. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I'm so excited. So I head up there tomorrow. So please stay in touch, and we'll see you at some more shows and things. Here we are in this beautiful, beautiful church, beautiful space. We have one more song for you, and I just can't think of a better song than the one that you are starting to play right now. I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? When it goes like this, the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to your kitchen chair, broke your throat, and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew well, maybe there's a God above, but all I've ever learned from love was how to shoot somebody who outdrew you. Well, it's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not someone who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken heart. Hallelujah. 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 Joe Cruz, I'm Jennifer Grimm. Please stay in touch, jennifergrimm.com. Enjoy the forum. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. My name is Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the senior minister here at Westminster Presbyterian Church, located on Nicollet Mall in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, and I am the moderator of the forum. Before we go any further, please join me in thanking again Joe Cruz and Jennifer Grimm. Thank you so much. We are pleased today to be joined virtually by Dr. Kyong Chun, Director of the Digital Democracy Institute at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia. Dr. Chun's talk today is co-sponsored by the Nobel Conference at Gustavus Adolphus College. Learn more about the Nobel Conference at gustavus.edu/Nobel Conference. For more than 40 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. Today is the second program in our season on the topic of democracy. We have invited 4 diverse, dynamic speakers to grapple with how democracy has been a tool for social progress and racial equity, and how it has been employed to marginalize communities based on race and class. They will speak to the role each one of us has in renewing democracy and ensuring it works for everyone. We invite you to visit our website to learn more and to listen also to our recent forum with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and immigrant rights advocate Jose Antonio Vargas. There you can also learn more about upcoming forums with Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, and the Honorable John R. Thunheim, Chief Judge of the United States District Court of Minnesota. These programs, like all of our forums, have been made possible thanks to individual supporters. More than 85% of the forum's budget comes directly from people like us, individuals who support and then power these programs by making generous gifts. If you are able, please consider supporting the forum. For those of you here in-house, in person, welcome. Good to have you here. And there should be donation envelopes in your programs, and you can leave those as you exit in a basket or some kind of a little table there. And those of you watching live stream, you can go to westminsterforum.org/donate. We make the forum happen, and I encourage you to be generous to keep these conversations going. Donations of any amount make an impact, and we are grateful to all of you for your support. When we get to, sorry, I'm working with various pages up here and a laptop. I'd like to acknowledge the media sponsors of today's forum. Thanks to Minnesota Public Radio for recording and broadcasting all of our forum programs. A brief note about our radio broadcasts of these particular forums. For this season, and for the first time ever, Minnesota Public Radio is presenting all of our town hall forums as a special series. You'll be able to hear today's talk along with the rest of our fall season of speakers on democracy on NPR every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 o'clock, the week after Thanksgiving, November 29th through December 2nd. That means forums will not be live broadcast on Minnesota Public Radio this fall. You can still watch or listen to our programs live, either here in-house or on our website or Facebook page. And you'll be able to tune into all of these forums on NPR later this year, the week right after Thanksgiving. Thanks as well to our longtime media sponsor, MinnPost, a source for nonpartisan news coverage of Minnesota and beyond. Find more at minnpost.com. And we're grateful to our newest media sponsor as well, Sahan Journal. Sahan Journal provides news coverage that illuminates issues affecting Minnesota immigrants, communities of color, and redefining what it means to be a Minnesotan. Learn more and see their coverage at Sahan Journal, S-A-H-N, sahanjournal.com. The health and safety of our community is still our top priority here at Westminster. And as we, like all of us, continue to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, we are limiting attendance here in the sanctuary and requiring masks throughout the building. Thank you all in-house for wearing your mask. You look great, by the way. At least that part I can see of you. Thank you for your understanding. Thank you all as well for getting vaccinated here, and for those on live stream, thank you for getting vaccinated. Today's forum is a first for us. We had planned on Dr. Chun joining us in person at today's forum, but with the rise of the COVID virus Delta variant and the likelihood that she would increase her risk in flying here, it was decided that Dr. Chun traveling here would pose too great a risk. Through the wonders of technology and some very hard work by our technical staff, Keith Kopatz and Eric Adams, Dr. Chun is joining us live today via Zoom. She'll be delivering her talk on democracy's digital dilemma, which we are both projecting on the screen here in the sanctuary and live streaming for the audience here at home. In the second half of today's program, Dr. Chun will be taking questions live from you here in-house in this sanctuary. Those of you who are with us via the live stream or chat, I was going to say Facebook, but I understand Facebook is down around the world right now. You'll find a blank card in-house to write a question. Those who are watching via live stream, please do so by entering your question in the chat feature you'll see on the bottom of the page, bottom of the screen. At the end of our time of presentation here, we'll collect those questions, and I will present as many to Dr. Chun as time allows. If you are watching online, please write your questions into the chat feature at any point as we are moving through the presentation, and we will record those and ask as many as possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker on the Town Hall Forum. Dr. Wendy Kyong Chun is the Canada 150 Research Chair in New Media at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. She leads the Digital Democracies Institute, which studies the proliferation of misinformation, abusive online language, and discrimination via algorithms. Dr. Chun's upcoming book, Discriminating Data, delves into how big data is designed to drive divisions across political, racial, and class lines. She's the author of several books on media effects on society, including Updating to Remain the Same, Habitual New Media, Programmed Visions, Software and Memory, and Control and Freedom, Power and Paranoia in the Age of Fiber Optics. Previously, Dr. Chun was professor and chair of modern culture and media at Brown University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wendy Chun.
Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thank you, Dr. Chun, for being here. And we're going to first hear your remarks and then take some questions, hopefully live from our audience here and then via technology as well. The chat room, the feature, the live stream, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. I'm honored to be speaking with you as part of such a storied series. And I'm sorry not to be physically there with you in that beautiful sanctuary, listening to that incredible music. So two of my favorite songs sung, I don't think I've heard a more beautiful rendition of Hallelujah. So thank you. Although perhaps it's appropriate I'm here via Zoom, since we're here to talk about democracy's digital dilemma. Democracy's digital dilemma. Well, talking via Zoom pretty much sums it all up. So we're having a town forum about democracy via platform owned by a company that's admitted to suspending accounts of human rights activists in China. And last year, US federal prosecutors charged a former Zoom executive of conspiracy to surveil, disrupt, and censor calls within the United States. Surveilling, disrupting, and censoring calls within the United States about the Tiananmen Square massacres. So about pro-democracy protests. And yet here we are, using Zoom, mixing public dialogue with surveillance, town halls with private corporations. It's also perhaps appropriate that I'm here in Boston because of COVID-19. I can't be there with you right now because of a pandemic that we all hoped would be over by now. And that lingers in part because of conspiracy theories spread and amplified via social media. So right now, I'm sure there's an alternative Zoom session about vaccines and the zombie apocalypse. Unfortunately, my 5G receptors aren't working that well right now. Otherwise, I could tune into that as well. But how many of us feel as though we couldn't have gotten through the pandemic without platforms like Zoom? So I Skyped with my family every week. I'm sure I saw them more often than I do usually. I went to dance parties in New York City via Zoom. And I'm currently in my home in Boston, which lies on the territory of the Massachusetts and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. For most of this year, I live in Vancouver, in an apartment that lies on lands that were never ceded. I live on the unceded traditional Coast Salish lands, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I thank them for caring for this land and for tolerating my presence on it. As many have pointed out, this land acknowledgement, which I start every lecture with, is a small gesture. I've emphasized that it's a small gesture. But it's part of an ongoing truth and reconciliation process, a process to face and hopefully offer meaningful reparations for atrocities Canada's committed, such as the Indian residential schools. So for almost 100 years, Indigenous children from the age of 6 were torn from their families and communities. They were torn from their families and communities and placed in schools and dormitories in which they were under constant surveillance. And they were punished for speaking their own languages. They were maltreated, malnourished, and experimented on, all in the name of democracy and education. To give you one example, these schools were often rampant sites of tuberculosis. The students were malnourished and they were living in close quarters. So what did those in charge do? Well, rather than providing them with food, more food, because they were malnourished, nurses took blood samples to help researchers study and understand the effects of malnutrition on child development, right? And historian Ian Mosby has shown us how these experiments on malnourished Indigenous children in these schools was key to Canada's food guide, right? The guide for how to keep children healthy with the regular uptake of vitamins and nutritious food. So not surprisingly, we keep finding unmarked graves of children, graves that survivors told us many, many years ago, and constantly, they told us those graves were there. So the truth we need to face, like so many truths we need to face, have never been hidden. We've just chosen to look away. And it's time that we face the truth. As my introductory comments make clear, the problems we face, democracy's digital dilemma, go beyond the digital. Democracy's digital dilemma goes beyond technology. And democracy's digital dilemma is so important because it's tied to fundamental issues of equality and freedom, segregation and discrimination, publicity and surveillance, land and power. Now, when most people think of democracy's digital dilemma, they usually think of 4 issues, right? The first is the digital divide. So inequalities in access to and control over technologies. This is clearly important. Think of the impact of the pandemic on education in rural communities. Right? The other topic people talk about is polarization. Right? So how social media amplifies differences, how it can foster insurrections and threaten civil war. The third thing they talk about is biased machine learning programs that perpetuate inequality. And I'm sure many of you have heard about Compass, because Compass is the example that most people talk about. Compass is a software program that allegedly helps determine the risk of recidivism. So how likely someone is to commit another crime. So inmates, as well as prison authorities fill out questionnaires. The answers are fed into this program. The program spits out a number, and this number is used often in sentencing and in parole decisions. The problem is that it's been shown to discriminate against racial minorities, and in fact, it's been sued. People also talk about predpol and other forms of predictive policing that put an overwhelming amount of attention on certain communities. The last thing people usually talk about is government and corporate surveillance and manipulation, right? So how many of you have seen The Social Dilemma? So as you'll recall, in it, remorseful tech dudes explain how personalized machine learning recommender systems have made us stressed out lab rats, right? So how they've made us manipulated like marionettes by evil, non-remorseful tech dudes and algorithms that evolve faster than we can and that constantly push our buttons. So we're addicted to our feeds. And when people tend to think about democracy's digital dilemma, they tend to blame technology for everything, right? So if we just got rid of the internet, if we just got rid of social media, everything would be okay. But it's not so simple. We're here via Zoom, and town squares were always sites of conflict and inequality. As Keith Waylu and other people have pointed out, slaves were sold in town squares in the United States. And we have to remember that we got into this situation because we were told that technology equals democracy. So how many of you remember the late 1990s, right? This is when the internet emerged as cyberspace, right? And the internet, we were told, was going to fix everything, right? It was going to fix racism because you couldn't see somebody's race online. And because it was the space of anonymity, it was going to be inherently fair. Cyberspace, right? Space. It was supposed to open the universe so we could explore and colonize human minds. So what could go wrong with a wild west of minds fueled on dreams of colonization and anonymity? So perhaps it's not surprising that we've moved from thinking about the internet as inherently good, as a liberation technology, and during the Arab Spring, everyone talked about the internet as a liberation technology, towards thinking about the internet as inherently bad. Right? But again, it's not so simple. It's not so simple because if social media have made us stressed out and angry lab rats, it's in part because they're based on and because they promote segregation. They're part of a longer social experiment that has everything to do with land, everything to do with housing, and who is and how we treat our neighbors. And there's a ton to say. And I and many others have been studying this problem for a long time. So I'll use my remaining time to touch on questions of polarization and homophily. Right? So social media networks are built on homophily, love of the same. So social media networks presume that birds of a feather flock together, that similarity breeds connection. Websites encourage you to buy, to listen, or to click on things that people like you have bought, listened to, or clicked on. But everything you like, everything you buy, everything you listen to isn't treated the same. Your most valuable likes are those that are controversial or slightly strange. Liking Harry Potter, for instance, is pretty innocuous, and millions of people like Harry Potter, so it doesn't tell us much. Liking Napoleon Dynamite or liking Westminster Town Forum, now that's valuable. And we become most predictable when we think different with others, right? So Apple and Fox News have made fortunes by telling us to think different and railing against the mainstream media. But Apple's one of the most dominant corporations in the world, and Fox News is the most popular channel on US basic cable. But what's so insidious about these network neighborhoods, about these network neighborhood models, is that they presume that neighborhoods should be segregated, that your neighbors should be like yourself. So if we manage to love our neighbors like ourselves, it's because they've literally become like ourselves. So where did the concept of homophily come from? Not surprisingly, US residential neighborhoods are often given as evidence of naturally occurring homophily. So one of the most important textbooks in the field, when they talk about homophily and how natural it is, they say, think of an urban city, right? So think of Chicago. See how neighborhoods vary by race and ethnicity. Yeah, indeed. Let's all think about Chicago. Okay? Let's think about US urban cities. As many people have shown, US residential segregation isn't accidental, right? It's carefully planned and engineered. It was carefully planned and engineered through laws, highway construction, covenants, and race-based mortgages. And here I'd like to give a shout out to the University of Minnesota Library's excellent Mapping Prejudice project. And this Mapping Prejudice project looks at the effects of race-based covenants on the twin cities. And I'd like to thank Tane for giving me that URL so I could see this fascinating project and for inviting me here today. Now, what's key is that the links between homophily and US segregation are deep and profound. They're deep and profound. And the very term homophily comes from a study of US biracial public housing. It comes from a study of US biracial public housing by Columbia University's Bureau of Applied Sociological Research. And the Bureau of Applied Sociological Research, the BASR, was led by sociologist Robert K. Merton and Karl Lazarsfeld. And they studied these projects in order to understand morale in post-World War II public housing. So early on in the United States, public housing was mainly white. The first public housing in the United States was Techwood Homes in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was a whites-only neighborhood. It was built using New Deal money, and it was built by evicting Black residents from the neighborhood. So post-World War II and during World War II, they started building biracial housing projects. Post-World War II, there was a massive housing crisis. And post-World War II, right after World War II, over 70% of Americans supported public housing, right? Over 70% of Americans supported public housing. But yet, there was a hot debate over what to do over the housing crisis. Right? This was because developers wanted more private housing like Levittown. Right? So they wanted government money to go into private segregated housing. And we all know what happened. Right? And this is why we have this huge wealth gap in the United States. For all of you who want to read more about this, Ira Katz-Nelson, When Affirmative Action Was White, details this nicely. So in response to this debate, the Columbia researchers conducted a study of two public housing projects. The first project, which is the first project they studied, was Crafttown, which was a project, it was cooperatively owned, of some 700 white families in New Jersey. So Crafttown was a code name for Winfield, New Jersey, and Winfield, New Jersey still exists, and it's still cooperatively owned. And the other project was Hilltown, a biracial low-rent project of about 800 families in Western Pennsylvania. And Hilltown was codenamed for Addison Terrace, which is a housing project in Pittsburgh. Now, their study was wide-ranging and ambitious. The researchers talked to one family member of every household, and they asked them questions about privacy. Did they feel like there was too much surveillance in the public housing project? They asked them about their political engagement. They asked them whether or not they engaged in social clubs. They asked them who they talked to, and they asked them who their three closest friends were. Who their three closest friends were, regardless of where they lived. And the Columbia Bureau of Applied Sociological Research focused on friendship because they believed that new friendships revealed the impact of social engineering. And housing projects were all about social engineering. They were openly about social engineering. And the researchers chose these housing projects because they were planned and closed communities. They talked about them as experimental spaces, like the spaces of a physicist, right? So think again of the social dilemma and the ways in which we're in this experimental space. Now, they didn't publish the results of the survey, except for one chapter that focused on friendship patterns in Hilltown. And in this chapter that they published, they coined two terms. They coined the term homophily, which has gone on to dominate social media networks, but they also coined the term heterophily, which is friendship based on opposites. Now, this chapter is cited all the time as proof of homophily. Like there are thousands upon thousands of citations of this article as proof of homophily. It's one of the most cited but clearly unread articles, right? Because Lazarsfeld and Merton didn't presume homophily was always true. They were actually skeptical. They were skeptical that birds of a feather always flock together. And they asked, when is homophily true? When does similarity drive friendship? And when is heterophily true, right? When does opposites drive friendship? And they found that status homophily in these projects in general didn't matter, that there wasn't status homophily, except for gender and race, right? And let me just note, to show that gender homophily was almost 100%, they actually threw out all the responses where someone named a couple, the Smiths are our friends, or a family member. Now, Lazarsfeld and Merton concentrated on the question and importance of race. And they argued that behind status homophily, so similarity based on status, lay value homophily, the sharing of values. And to prove this, they concentrated on the over-selection of white liberals and white illiberals as friends. Where you were a liberal if you believed that housing should be biracial and that folks in Hilltown got along. You were illiberal if you thought the opposite. And you were ambivalent if you thought that the housing project shouldn't be biracial, but you admitted that folk in Hilltown get along. And where friend, again, equals one of your three closest friends, irregardless of where they live. And I just want to note that this definition of friend was very different than the definition of friends that were used in other contemporary studies. They would concentrate on friends that lived within the project, or they didn't restrict it to closest friends. Now, to prove that value homophily existed, they actually threw out the responses of all the Black residents. So they said there were too few illiberal or ambivalent Black residents with friends in Hilltown. So they never presumed that values could cross race lines. They never grouped all liberals, ambivalents, or illiberals together. And in their subsequent analysis and model of friendship formation, they actually ignored the white ambivalence, which was the largest category of white residents. The next category was liberal, and as a whole, the project was overwhelmingly liberal. There was actually a very small number of illiberals. But the important thing is, although the responses of the Black residents were thrown out, they weren't accounted for, the Black residents were central, right? Without them, there'd be no clean homophilic connections. So think of a network map, right? Think of all those clean lines surrounded by all these gaps, right? These Black residents, they live in these gaps that make these other seemingly clean connections possible. And what's so key is that these gaps are never empty. Again, the researchers never published the data for the study or the report. And the report was written by Merton, Patricia West, and Marie Yehuda. And this report was actually used as evidence for desegregation and the power of desegregation in Brown versus Board of Education. And the actual report shows us that the over-selection of white illiberals in real numbers wasn't statistically significant. That's what the researchers said, right? And that the Black and white residents did have friends and acquaintances of the other race. They had friends and acquaintances of the other race and people that they met and made friendships with within the project. And we would have also seen that what mattered most to friendship formation was propinquity, was space, right? It was who was your neighbor. So Hilltown, Addison Terrace, was biracial. So this meant that the buildings and the complexes were separated by race, all except for one building. And one building was separated by floor because when the white residents were moving in, the other units weren't ready and they were told you could either move in now or not move in. So they all moved in. And the superintendent said that was the one building that never had any problems. So homophily, by presuming racial segregation, launders hate into love. So how do you show you love your own? By fleeing when others show up, by hating others, right? Homophily magnetizes communities. Right, so think of that classic physics experiments where you have all those iron filings together in a mass, right? And then you stick a magnet. And then what emerges is this really interesting pattern that looks like a network, right? With two clusters at either ends, right? So homophily clusters us into agitated clusters of comforting rage, right? So all those filings that are together, that are the same, actually repel each other. And so what happens through homophily is that we hate our neighbors as we do ourselves. Right? Okay, but if this is so, what can we do? What can we do? We can do a lot. Right? First, we have to realize that the proliferation of echo chambers and polarization, they aren't inevitable. Segregation isn't inevitable. We never have to accept segregation or discrimination. And we have to refuse to accept the kinds of past discrimination, social engineering, and defaults that are embedded into our algorithms and that we live every day through these concepts. We have to remember that the US didn't just produce segregation, it produced the civil rights movement. Right? So what if, instead of constantly drawing from racist models, we built models based on anti-racist movements? So what if rather than producing models that pervert and distort society, and they pervert and distort society because they just focus on one type of relation, similarity? What if instead of just focusing on that, we produced models that engage the richness of human relations? Again, there were friendships and so much more going on in the housing projects and in our lives every day, right? So how many of you know people who are heterosexual? Any of you know people who are heterosexual? Well, in the world of absolute gender homophily, that's almost impossible, right? So think about electricity as well. It travels from negative to positive, right? And recommender systems are increasingly using heterophily as a way to diversify their recommendations. But better yet, What if we built networks built on mutual indifference? So I don't know how many of you ride the bus or take public transportation, but I do all the time. And I think about everything you have to not care about to do things like ride the bus, wear a mask, or to flatten the curve, to live in equality, right? So what's key is that the solution and problems, they touch everything and everyone. And technology, as many of us have been arguing for years, technology can't solve these problems for us. But our technology is a place where we can start. We can start by analyzing our technology and our defaults because our technology is tied to the world around us. So to face democracy's digital dilemma, we need to think through our concepts and who we touch when we use our networks. So when we use terms like homophily or correlation, we touch these communities who are so important to these terms, but whose answers were erased. Whenever we use networks, we reside in their space. And whenever we use networks, we touch each other, right? So your personal computer and your phone, for example, it downloads all the traffic of others around it and then only actively erases that traffic that's not directly erased to you, which means networks work by us being in constant contact with each other, right? So the question before us is, how might we, as we touch each other, reside with each other to imagine and to build a better world? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chun. This is the Westminster Town Hall Forum coming to you from Westminster Presbyterian Church on Nicollet Mall in downtown Minneapolis. My name is Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the senior minister here at Westminster and moderator of the forum. Our speaker today is the director of the Digital Democracies Institute, Dr. Wendy Chun. If you're here in the sanctuary, we invite you to write a question on a card and hold it up for the ushers to see and collect. And if you're watching online, please write your questions in the chat below the YouTube or Facebook video. And we'd like to thank our co-sponsor for today's talk, the Nobel Conference at Gustavus Adolphus College. This year's Nobel Conference is focusing on big data. Dr. Chun will be giving a separate talk at the Nobel Conference on Wednesday. Her talk on big data, like everything at the Nobel Conference, is free to watch via live stream on Gustavus's website. Just visit gustavus.edu/Nobel. We're partnering with Gustavus and the Nobel Conference on a follow-up program to today's forum on Tuesday evening, tomorrow. We're hosting a small group discussion via Zoom where you can join others who listen to Dr. Chun's talk today and talk about the issues she's raised around democracy and technology. We'll gather via Zoom on Tuesday evening, tomorrow, and the director of the Town Hall Forum, Tane Danger, will offer some guided questions to spark reflection and conversation about today's talk. Then participants will be put into breakout rooms for small group discussion. This special follow-up program is tomorrow, Tuesday, October 5 at 6 p.m. Central. It is free and open to all. We expect there will be many Gustavus students participating and hope members of the Westminster Town Hall Forum community will be there as well. You can find the link to join the small group discussions at westminsterforum.org and clicking on Dr. Chun's talk. Now, while the ushers collect questions in the sanctuary, I'd like to thank our broadcast partner, Minnesota Public Radio. For the first time ever, NPR is broadcasting this fall's forum as a special week of programs. You will hear all of our fall programs on democracy on NPR each day at 11 a.m. during the week of November 29 to December 2nd, the week right after Thanksgiving. All forums are also available as a video at any time on the forum website and Facebook page. Thanks as well to our media partners, MinnPost and Sahan Journal. Today is our second of our fall season programs focusing on democracy, and we invite you to learn more about our other talks in the series with Jose Antonio Vargas, LaTosha Brown, and Chief Judge John Tunheim on our website, westminsterforum.org. And now, Dr. Chun, if you're ready, I'll present the questions from the audience. I was grateful, I'm going to ask the first question. I was grateful for your use of Greek in your presentation, homophily, hama meaning same, phili from philia meaning love, same love of the same group. Can you describe more specifically how homophily is affecting our political climate in American democracy today?
Thank you for the question and for saying the Greek so beautifully. So homophily is really insidious because there is, if you think about the things that you get recommended, if you think of political feeds, et cetera, on Facebook or other social media networks, how it operates is that you're again selected to be part of a certain neighborhood, and then you're given recommendations for people who are determined to be quote unquote like you. And again, what's chosen to be like you isn't that, something innocuous, like you like sunshine, right? It's often something that's controversial because of course, this is run by clickbait advertising. And that's something that the social dilemma really beautifully articulates, right? So the idea is to keep you on, to keep you agitated, right? And it's, again, these things that they know have agitated other people who are like you. Right? And that the more that certain people who share these controversial points are together, the more agitated you become. So what's really baffling to me about homophily is that it's often justified in terms of comfort. So the idea is when you're with these people who are like you, you're comfortable. Right? And it could be just my family, but just to offer you an example that resonates with me, it's like family gatherings when we're supposedly all the same. We're both genetically and culturally have the same upbringing. Those are really uncomfortable places and agitated places. So the idea somehow that homophily is comfortable, like really erases the fact and how it launders hate into love.
I should note that I used your phrase, agitated clusters of comforting rage, in a sermon recently, and I heard about it. People recognize themselves in it. Is part of your message, go make friends and acquaintances who are different from you? Is it as simple as that?
I think it's as simple as recognize the difference that resides in our life every day. That what's so important to democracy is freedom and equality and difference. And what we need to think through are the ways in which the opportunities for freedom and equality and difference are robbed from us when we're shunted in certain ways. And we have to understand the impacts of that both politically and financially. And so I think that the simple message of my talk is that we need to reimagine the world. And we need to work with people across all sectors, from people building technology to people who are politicians, as well as everyone in the community, to reimagine and to put in place a better world.
The simple message from your talk is reimagine the world. Good. I want to ask about how we might use the government as a tool for engineering some of that reimagining of the world. Should the government regulate digital platforms, in your view, to eliminate false information and conspiracy theories that circulate so frequently in these digital means?
The government is already regulating things. I think that the question isn't should they regulate it or should they regulate it differently. I think some of the most powerful arguments that have been made about platforms, and here I'm thinking of Sarah Roberts' work and Tarleton Gillespie's work, is that platforms actively moderate, and it's the type of moderation that makes the platform. So right now, people talk a lot about the Communications Decency Act and how one part of the Communications Decency Act made platforms not responsible for content. Right? And this has led to a lot of the situation we're in. But that's a decision about governing and how to govern. And I think that what's interesting with what happened with Cambridge Analytica and with a lot of things is that a lot of corporations start saying we need policies. We need to know about policies, not just ethics. We need regulations, and we need to know what's right or wrong if we're going to act in this space. And companies are more and more treated like media companies rather than technology companies. And so that's a different form of regulation. But I think that the question of regulation and how governments regulate, because every government does regulate but differently, in order to answer that question, you have to look at what other governments do, right? So the EU has very strong, and especially Germany, very strong laws around hate crimes. There are more and more legislation around deliberate disinformation, et cetera. And I think it's part of a larger picture. So Canada has a lot of investment in digital citizenship initiatives and the idea of digital citizenship in education.
You've been teaching on this topic for now more than 2 decades and have seen a lot of change. The internet was barely a thing when you started teaching. Did the internet and social media have to turn out like this? Could it have gone a different way?
Absolutely. I remember, so I worked in hardware when I was in engineering. So my undergrad degree is in engineering. And I worked on IEEE 802.3 10-base-T. So this was when Ethernet, before Ethernet was telco, before it was thin or thick coax. And I remember thinking through, the internet in this, the internet is basically a control protocol for how information should be sent. And I always found it really strange that this technical definition of good control protocol in the mid-1990s, and this is when the internet exploded, was sold as a technology of freedom. I was like, how did that happen? How does that make sense? And you could say that was just a profound misunderstanding of technology. But I think what's so key is that there are these moments where you have these misreadings or engagements with technology. So an old technology, the internet, became new in the mid-1990s by being conflated with 80s cyberpunk fiction, became cyberspace. There are these really interesting moments which help activate different imaginings and futures of technology. But I mean, technology changes all the time. I mean, I think that one decision, for instance, to store everything, I mean, that decision had a lot of impact. When I started, storage was really expensive. We didn't store things because you had to think, do you really want to store things? We had these floppy disks were these amazing things. So the fact that the storage now is a default was a political as well as technical decision. And decisions can always be made differently.
Can you say more about this phrase, mutual indifference? It seems counterintuitive that we want to encourage mutual indifference to make progress.
Yeah, so part of that comes from the respondents of the Black residents in Addison Terrace, and they were asked, what do you think about living in biracial housing? Now, the thing you have to remember about Addison Terrace is that Addison Terrace was brand new. It was beautiful. There were amenities like fridges, indoor bathrooms. There was laundry equipment downstairs. All of this stuff was unheard of for both Black and white residents post-World War II. And for many Black residents, they felt as though Addison Terrace, which was opened by Roosevelt, was so important because it meant the US government was finally coming through on its creed of equality, the American creed. And they were interviewed and said, what do you think about living here? And one woman said, what's important to me is not sort of welcoming all these white people in or not, but rather that we're in this space where we all tolerate each other and we live in equality. And so part of thinking through mutual indifference as a form of care, again, is like riding the bus. You have to care about a lot not to ride the bus, but it's a form of care because we don't care, we have public transportation. We wear masks. In order to wear a mask, you have to not care about many things, but we do this as a form of care for each other. So trying to think of indifference not as simply being indifferent, but living in difference. How can we live in difference without these romantic notions of what living in difference means?
As you pointed out in your talk, the presence of homophily, that is like-minded, segregated, closed communities, precedes the internet. In fact, you refer to Minneapolis, our own issues with segregated housing, with racial covenants, et cetera. That's structural, that's systemic, that is hardwired into our communities. Is it realistic to think that we could create change when we're pushing against that using just our phones, our digital devices?
Well, first thing, we can't just use our phones, right? Part of it is to understand the ways in things, everything's connected. But there was a time when racial covenants were the norm, where segregation was the norm, and people were like, how can we change this? How can we change this? How are we people going to change something like this? The civil rights movement happened. And it happened through alliances and movements that targeted various things, from commercial to political. And I think that's what we need now. A lot of people have been talking about a new civil rights movement, and Ruha Benjamin, Sophia Noble, many folk. Ruha Benjamin has been talking about the new Jim Code. Sophia Noble has talked about algorithms of oppression. Cathy O'Neill has talked about weapons of mass destruction. And all of them have been calling for this kind of political movement. I mean, the thing we can't believe is that we can't change things.
How do we get around the power of Facebook?
Well, so when social media was just starting out, just even think of the year 2000. Time magazine's person of the year was you. It's this like little mirror, it was all you. And it said, you're the person of the year. Without you, there'd be no social media. Without you, there'd be nothing, right? And back then, people were talking about how all these platforms were parasites on us, right? Tiziana Terranova talked about free labor, right? All of this, our likes, et cetera, it's built on us. It's built on our free labor. So you can't have Facebook, you can't have these companies without us. And what's so key for us to understand and interact is to say, yes, that's true. Think about the structures that are in place and how we relate to each other. And also, rather than thinking of ourselves as marionettes, so, in the social dilemma, we were like marionettes and there was this evil dude, making us do stuff. Rather than thinking of ourselves as marionettes, we should think of ourselves as characters. So characters in this drama called big data, right? And characters have some power, right? And what characters point out is that, first of all, who you are on social media isn't just you. It's not simply behaviorist manipulation. So people on Instagram, they're acutely aware that they're characters and they're putting something out, right? But also what's so important is if we're getting these recommendations from people, quote unquote, like you, this means we're influencing them as well, right? That again, we're in public, that our actions affect others. We're constantly in public when we're on social media. So we should think of ourselves in public and think about what rights we should have as people in public in social media.
A question has come forward about the use of social media. If our most valuable likes are the less common ones, as you asserted, how is it possible to highlight these more? the most valuable likes being the less common ones. How can we highlight those less common ones?
Oh, how is it done algorithmically? So in the recommender systems and figuring out your neighborhoods, they look for, and they know of certain films. So a lot of this comes from the Netflix challenge, a lot of the early recommender systems. So Netflix offered a lot of money and a good deal of its database and said, here you have it. If you can improve our recommender engine by 10%, then you win this prize. And what they were able to show and think through this competition, and a lot of what they published was open, they knew which movies were slightly controversial, right? The ones that weren't, that divided publics, right? So not only that, but also for looking at recommenders for other commercial goods, they look at those things which are which tend to polarize people. So like, in other words, somebody who was part of a OkCupid once argued that the most telling likes are the threes, because a 3 is someone who got a 5 or a 1. And so these, which are polarizing, are actually tell you the most in terms of what to recommend somebody again.
As a person who has no interaction at all with social media, I'm confused, but I'm sure those who do interact with social media understand. You referred to the integrated hilltop community as a good illustration of how we can actually create communities that are not based on homophily. Can we do that online, and how would we?
Sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you. Yes, we can. We don't have to. So many of these issues come from the ways in which we're recommended certain things and put into certain places. I think that what's interesting is that some people have tried to combat this notion of being tracked through your likes through things like Track Me Not. So this is, just to give you one example, a web app that likes everything for you, right? That likes everything on a page for you, right? And so the companies hate this, right? Because they pay according to likes. So it's financially dangerous for them. But it also says you like everything. So if everybody was to say they like everything, right? That poses an interesting dilemma. It throws a wrench into the system. So there are things like that people are thinking through. But again, I think the larger question is how we can think through digital democracy's digital dilemma, not simply by thinking, let's fix the platforms. Let's fix the world. These platforms, these algorithms, their defaults and what they amplify come from the world around us. So the answer can't be from fixing the program. So the other way I like to think about it is in terms of global climate change models, right? So think of these algorithms like global climate change models. So they give us the most likely future based on past actions, right? But with global climate change models, we don't then say, yay, this is the result, we're going to make this automatically true. They give us this likely future, so we'll act differently. When the model says there's a 2% increase in mean temperature, we seek to fix the world, not the program, unless we're global climate change deniers. And that opens up a whole different question about, do we need these programs to diagnose problems that we already know about?
I must say, as a preacher, I'm particularly intrigued by your language about neighbor. The question that triggers Jesus telling the Good Samaritan story is, who is your neighbor? And Jesus says, basically, your neighbor is the one who is not like you, who might hate you, who might despise you, but who is wounded and needing some help. And you stop, in spite of your difference with them, you stop to help. Are you really hopeful that we can ever get to that kind of understanding of neighbor, given the power of the internet to push us away from that?
Absolutely. I mean, you're still preaching. Surely that you're hopeful too, right? Given the ways the world has turned out so badly over and over and over again. But again, I don't think it's just the internet. I think it's part of this larger problem that we all need to work on together. And we can start thinking through these problems through these algorithms as case studies, but also as places of intervention. Right, so these are experimental places. They're open about these being experimental places. They're based on people who are experimented on. So sentiment analysis, which is used to push people's buttons online, a lot of that initial analysis of sentiment came from studying Japanese Americans in internment camps in World War II. So there's a lot of these intern communities that are at the base of these concepts. But again, these communities were far larger than the small parts that were extracted from them. And yes, we can certainly then, first of all, have this larger view in place when we think through models of the world, because that's what social media is, to come up with different kinds of models and understand the impact of models. And we can work collectively to build different worlds. And technologists too, they want something different than this. So it's an issue of finding people working together to make these kinds of differences. But to understand, sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's a wonderful, hopeful note to end on, Dr. Chun. That's all we have time for today, but we are really grateful for your remarks. Please join me, everyone, in thanking Dr. Wendy Chun for joining us today at the Westminster Town Hall Forum. And thanks again to our co-sponsor for today's program, the Nobel Conference at Gustavus Adolphus College, and I understand there's some Gustavus leaders out here. There they are, if you want to visit with them afterwards. And a reminder about our follow-up event with Gustavus Tuesday, tomorrow evening. Please join us via Zoom for a chance to continue to talk about these issues in small groups. And the small group discussion tomorrow is at 6 p.m. Go to the westminsterforum.org website and click on Dr. Chun's talk. Thank you all for joining us today. Please join us again this fall online or in person. You can find more information at our westminsterforum.org website. There you can also access our archive where you can listen to more than 40 years of talks of the forum. You can always find ways to support us there as well. Thank you, and please join us again at the Westminster Town Hall Forum. Thank you, Dr. Chun. It's been awesome to be with you today. Good work.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be here.